Hello.
Hi,
How are you?
good, how are you?
Pretty good. Just trying to get all of the information up. Oh, let's see. All right.
Ooh,
Hello.
how's everyone doing?
Hi.
So good.
Hey. Cindy, I can only see the top of your head sometimes.
Yeah, I think it also always depends on what kind of weird setup I have my computer on. Today it's like underneath a JavaScript book, like just oh wait,
Nice.
let Cole in here.
It's always like if I have the like control panel below showing me the like zoom options, then it's always just like Mac Zenzi. Yes. Yeah. So do people have exciting Mother's Day plans?
No,
No?
not me. No, I'll text my mom. Maybe I'll
Nice.
call her. I don't know. We'll see. How about you guys? Anything fun?
I accidentally booked my flight out on Mother's Day down to San Diego. So, and on the morning, so I was like, "So, Mom, sorry, how about dinner when I get back?"
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm attempting to essentially bully my children into building these Lego flowers with me.
Aw.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll do it, but so if the stars align, they might provide me with this Lego bouquet.
It's like the botanical ones, right? They're so cool. I like Legos. That's so fun.
They do too.
So hopefully they'll make some stuff with you.
Yes, hopefully.
Yeah.
Cool. So, should we get started?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do some demos. Who wants to show off their work first?
Jess
Yeah,
does. She told me. She was like, I'm so excited for today. I want to go first.
Cool.
I'm also lying.
Okay, then Steph is going first.
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay, so for our ticket, we had 9. Let me move this Zoom thing so I can see what I'm doing. As a user, I want to filter my shopping list to make it easier to locate an item in the list. Acceptance criteria, display a text field above the top of the shopping list. As the user types into the field, the list should narrow to display only items that contain the text the user entered in the filter field. When the field has text in it, the user should be able to tap the UI element, and the filter text should match any part of the item name. So here's the demo, which apparently I think I need flowers. And there it goes. And now we only have Funko. And then I can reset it. And there's the whole list. And the one thing that Justin and I did before we met, which was really helpful because we talked about planning last week, was we did some of our own like individual research and then came together with ideas of how to tackle the problem. And then we read these couple articles, and that was actually very good on time. Like it helped us save a lot of time coming in with like an idea of an approach before we met. And then I'll let Jess show the code.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. All right, can everyone see? All right, so ours starts with, we added an input. So here on change, so when you put in a letter, it does handle search input change, which is basically setting the state to whatever you put into the field. And then below that is our button. So button on click, it basically will reset the search input value to an empty string. So that's what, resets everything. And then we changed the map for displaying all the items. Instead of docs.map it was before, now it's list. And the list is set to filter list, which is this function right above it. So we set the input to lowercase and the word from the database, we lowercase it. That way they compare, because otherwise the function is includes is case sensitive. So if we didn't do that, it wouldn't match if one side was uppercase or not. So if the input is empty, return item. So basically, when the page first loads, it will display the whole list. Otherwise, it would be empty because the search input is empty. And then once you have something in input, it'll return the items that match it. So that's about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Really great. I love the code comments, and I love the filter list is really clear and obvious, and yeah, really great job. Does anyone have any questions or comments on it? I have one, which is what did you find in this issue to be like the most challenging part?
For me, it was taking like the solutions we found online and making them work in ours, because like the example is like a very simple, just the whole like React app's purpose is just to do like that filter thing. So to like break it apart and figure out where things went was that was like the hardest part. And then that's why we probably ended up with like the extra state and all that, because it was kind of like making things work.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And like that's like usually how it is when you find a solution for something, right? Like usually it's not someone who's building a shopping list, like a smart shopping list that's exactly like this application. So great job adapting a solution to your needs.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, wonderful. Anyone else, or do we want to jump in together?
Just congrats on discovering that little workflow hack. Just coming up with a plan before you start and saving yourself a bit of time. that's great. And I hopefully will see you guys kind of continue it into your pairings next week and see if that helps the entire group.
Yeah, it's great, guys. I love this kind of code because I don't know, it's like you're thinking about what people could put in, and I don't know. I just think it looks so good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and piggybacking off what Senzi said, yeah, I love the process change based upon what we had talked about in our retro. And this is something that you can see why retros are really valuable, and giving a try to the action items that we have. The action items are not always the greatest things, because we're like put on the spot at one time to be like, what is the thing that we're going to do to make ourselves improve? And then it's, you're throwing out ideas, but it's really nice when you can try them out, see how it works, and then see if this actually is an improvement that you'd want to move forward with. So it sounds like this is a pretty good one. Really cool. Cool. Let's see the other group, the calculating estimates.
All right, Cole, do you want me to start with the code or should we start with the UI? How do you feel? There he is. Yes. Oh, you're muted, friend.
All right. Sorry about that. I am on our original branch because we moved when Jess did the merge, she moved it back to the 24 hours. So it was kind of hard to see what was going on. But then something happened. I changed it back to seconds on our branch. And after the pool, it's not doing the refresh, but I can still do a demo. So we're not on the live site right now. Okay.
And Cole, you are on mute again.
Yeah, I saw that. I couldn't find where to unmute it. Anyway, okay, so here we are. We're on our list, and we'll go ahead and add a new item. And so we'll do orange. And basically what our ticket was there was a helper function that was already created that basically took in some data and that it started doing calculations for to make the list more intelligent so that it could estimate when the next item would be purchased or ballpark it. So we'll go with kind of soon. Add the item to our list. And if we look at the model right now, you can see right now last purchase date is null because we haven't purchased it yet. We set total purchases to 0 so we could increment it the way it was. Okay, and then once we click on orange, you can see total purchases increments. Previous estimate is 0 because we actually bought it today, so that's not incorrect. Refresh, and then if we purchase it again, we go purchases 2, and then the previous estimate goes to 9. So now it's actually calculating it. And if we keep on doing that, it's going to keep on going down because we're purchasing it right away. So that's pretty much it. I'll let Hans do the code.
Thank you, Cole. Let me share. All right, can you see it all right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so as Cole said, this is our issue. And to the code, This one was a little intimidating just because there wasn't any like UI, right? Like visually. And so we moved my guy. We went to the helper function and plenty of information, but I was still like, okay, what do we do? Cole was so smart to look at the database to see that like instant change. And so we read through this and we realized we needed 3 arguments, right? So we have 3 parameters here. And we did very little change to the add item form, but like he said, we added the total purchases and we set it to 0 since we're adding each time. And we worked still in the 2-click. Where am I doing? What is wrong with me? Oh, is clicked, the is clicked function. So we worked primarily all in here. And we first were like, okay, how can we, the first thing we did was we kind of just wanted to make sure that when we clicked it, it would add it. And so we found the item through the doc and we used the find method because we knew that first we were sub-zeroing everything and just getting like the very first item in the array, which worked, but it was like, we were like, this cannot be right. And so Cole found the find method, which is beautiful. And we made the item ID here. Total purchases was that plus 1. Very simple, very straightforward. So every time it's clicked, it goes up 1. That was really nice. As you saw yesterday, Mike, we had a ternary operator, but we just needed the or. So we changed that with you. That was great. We have today. And then, so the numbers or the parameters that we needed, we got the previous estimate, the days since last transaction, and total purchases. And so essentially we found those all in here where the previous estimates, well, it's this or that. And then the last purchase is the last purchase date, which we get from our object with the ID. And if there wasn't a last purchase, meaning we're buying it for the first time, then that's today. And then the days since purchase is today minus last purchase. So the magic behind the math is new, will be exciting to see when we buy more things, but that's essentially how it works. Is it takes this in, it goes back into the helper function, does all this. And if you're interested in knowing what this does, you can find it in the node modules. No, it's really cool. It's cool to see it. We worked on it Monday and then we were like, we'll come back in a couple of days and then we can see how the data has actually changed since we clicked on one. And yeah, I think we didn't do like, this was already everything we needed. So we were able to just put it all in here and it was pretty smooth once we did that. And then one thing that I did forget to mention was to convert the milliseconds into days. We use this other helper function, you could say, to just do a fun little math problem. And so once we have the days since last transaction, it turns it into a nice like actual day rather than the milliseconds. So yeah, that is our code. I think it looks really good. Cole did some cleaning up yesterday and it looks so nice. It was wild. If you saw it at the beginning of the week. And something that we did do, just lesson learned from like previous weeks, obviously, is we sent it to you guys after we worked on it for a couple hours just to make sure we were going in the right direction. And I know it helped me a lot to just be like, okay, because I didn't want to keep, yeah, anyway, that was helpful in retrospect. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, please let me know.
I know that when you reached out, it was really hammered out. You just kind of were, most of your questions were around testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I actually am curious, what were the initial blockers that made you reach out in terms of what you were seeing that you didn't feel that, did you not feel that it was the correct information being saved to your database, or did you just want confirmation that your logic was correct, or was there some other reason?
I know for me, and I think we just wanted confirmation that we were in the right direction. Like it was, we were getting numbers, like, but there was a point where we were getting like not a number or null or something. And we are like, okay, that's not right. But when we got numbers, we were like, okay, like this is good. Like it's going up in purchases and the estimate is going down. But yeah, it really was. What do you think, Cole? It was more of a confirmation from.
Yeah, it was kind of, we were pretty sure, like 98% sure what we were putting in was correct, but there was no way to definitively test it.
Mm.
We could see the number going down. Yeah, I mean, at that point, we're fairly certain it was right, aside from some bugs whenever we tested a little more that came up, like with the null and everything.
Mm.
But yeah, it was mostly just kind of like, how do you test this?
Yeah.
Is this right?
So yeah, so it was great. And then just again, for me, like the visual part of it all was like, okay, is it working? Like it's like the behind the scenes kind of data that yeah. So but I'm pumped about it. We were both, I mean,
Yeah, we really broke down. We kind of looked at the arguments and we're like, well, we know we need an increment. That's easy. So knock that out of the way, and then just kind of built on that, like broke it down into kind of like, let's get this done first, and then we'll use this to help with this. And yeah, so it was a lot. Like I think we both went into it thinking it was going to be a much bigger process, but I think breaking it down into simple things really kind of helped us hammer it out pretty quickly.
mhm.
Well, before I open it up to even more questions, I'm sure the null and not a number issues that you were having, were those kind of like JavaScript nuances? Can you give us an idea of what was happening there that was giving you that initial error?
It's because we were, I think the way that the variables were being initialized, so you can't increment null.
Mhm.
So like initially it's kind of like, well, you kind of do that as a reflex, as put null or something like that. So we noticed that real quick. And then there was one, what was the other one, Hans?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was like our database has been like picked at, throughout this whole process. So I think some of the numbers that were coming back wonky or coming back as not a number were from like previous data was weird, or not weird, but it's just like what we created that was new was not used to whatever was already given. So we were like, oh, let's just make a new item, right? It's like start from scratch. So I think we ran into that issue.
The other one that I remember was last purchased. Whenever it initially got put on the list, it doesn't have a purchase date. So then we were trying to run the function on not a purchase date. So it was coming up in milliseconds, which kind of threw things off for the first calculation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Stop that. Cool.
One thing that's really cool about the experience that I like with this ticket is that you kind of get the experience of almost a backend developer or an API developer, because you're more or less creating something that interacts with the database without having a UI for it, right? And so a lot of the time, like if you're on a team and you have front end and back end developer, at a certain point you'll come together and be like, what are my needs as a front end developer? Like, what does the UI have that I can that we can develop like a contract between us, the front end and the back end developer. And so it'll be really interesting in the upcoming tickets to see really like, how does this contract that we developed fare out, right? Once we connect it to the UI. I'm excited to see that. Really, really great job.
Thank you. I think we all did that this week. It felt like a great week for everyone.
Cool. Any additional questions or comments or anything? Awesome. Well, I'd ask more questions, but I feel like Zenzi's were so good. Taken care of.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome, of course.
All right. Well, this week we have a presentation that the wonderful Mike is going to be giving. And so if you'll give me just one second, there's a little bit of background noise I want to get rid of, and then I'll be right back.
Sure. So while we're waiting for Mike, like it looks like we're kind of wrapping up. So how does everybody feel?
And
I know I feel more confident, and I don't know. I just feel I like this group so much. I like hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, and
Well,
now that your communication's like starting to gel, I'm like, oh, we're just getting in the flow.
yeah, and once the project's over, that doesn't mean you'll never communicate or talk to each other again.
You're like, that's a part of it. You have to cut ties.
Cut ties with everyone you've met.
You're like, this is actually no one's real name.
No further networking, and yeah, that's it. Cool. All right. So today we're going to be talking about communication and communication for devs specifically. Can everyone see this fancy presentation?
Yes.
I can't. Okay, cool. I was about to say I can't see anyone's face for a second there, so I had no idea. Yeah. Okay. So communication for devs. All right. Wait. Okay. So communication, as we know, is super duper important. Today we're going to be talking about documentation, pull requests, self-documenting code, comments in code, commit messages, and tests. So there's lots and lots of different ways that one can communicate as a dev. So documentation. Sorry, I'm going to go back to this. So documentation can take a lot of different forms. Oftentimes it's, official documentation that you may read or write, like React docs or, some sort of documentation some sort of document that you write related to some like code that you wrote or widget that you created or something like that. It can also take the form of Slack threads. So, one of the really cool things with Slack and why it's so popular is that everything that you wrote is retained, assuming that you have an account that retains it. And so you can document things about a problem that you're solving within Slack. Or they could, they could come in the form of pull requests, as we'll be talking about, or all sorts of different things. But in this, really focusing and thinking about documentation in terms of like something that you would write that explains what, why, how, things like that. So why do we add documentation? We want to remind ourselves, what did I do? What was the point of this? Writing things down oftentimes helps you to learn. I know at Zapier, we have an optional thing that people have, like Friday updates, which is usually just for yourself so that you can kind of reflect on what did I do this last week and maybe solidify some learning that you had. It's a really great tool to revisit big decisions, and oftentimes people have or teams will have things like decision logs so that they can document decisions that they made. Super duper useful for onboarding new team members. Usually the time when you'll reflect on how good is our documentation is when you'll try to onboard a new team member, be like, oh, okay, this is just tribal knowledge versus this is something that's written down that we can use later. It helps to avoid institutional or tribal knowledge, which is, something where you have to be on the team and just it's passed between people by, oral folklore. And so it helps to avoid that. And it's also super empowering to all team members when you can go in and like know how to do something based on the README. You can just, how to set everything up and how to execute different parts of the application just based on it allows for a lot more self-sufficiency of team members. So some tips on how to write documentation. It's always great to write for the person who knows the least. You want to optimize it for the person who needs a quick reference. So just think about, like, I always feel like writing documentation takes a lot of empathy for other people, because you may think, well, okay, when I read documentation, do I go and like into the nitty gritties of a long paragraph? Probably, I mean, for me personally, I usually skim it. So like bolds and formatting that is makes things super duper obvious, and makes the commands that you would input very obvious is really, really great. Using examples and visuals, videos are always really nice, like a link to some sort of video that you made. Making it easily accessible. In my previous company, and this happens all the time, that there are documentation sites that you'll use, and sometimes documentation, if it's not easily accessible, meaning like there are lots of obvious links to it, maybe a some sort of a tag or a saved in Slack, like in channels, you can say, hey, go here for this documentation. If that's not obvious, it essentially becomes a place where things go to die. And so we don't want that. We want to make sure that our documentation is easy to get to. And one thing that I think is really oftentimes underrated or not thought about is, like, is your documentation fun? Maybe, like, I sometimes like to include humor in my documentation, write it from an odd perspective or something like that. And if people enjoy reading your documentation, then they'll probably read it. So really good example here is React Router. We can see, they have, it's really, it's optimized. We can see the formatting is really, really optimized for quick use. So like, go through and let's just say, I just want to get started. So I'm just like, okay, well, see, I'm gonna npx, an add, make it really easy to just kind of copy paste to get things going. And the examples are really obvious and nice. And then they give multiple examples. This is just like a really nice, beautiful piece of documentation that I really, really like. And there are all sorts of great examples of it. Okay, so on to the next, pull requests. So we've had a little bit of experience with pull requests. Pull requests are also a form of documentation. You may sometimes go back and be like, why did we do this thing? So a lot of the things that you think about with writing the documentation that we were just talking about totally apply to pull requests. Why do we write pull requests and try to put some effort into good pull requests? One is it gives reviewers context on your code. You can walk reviewers through your code and explain like why you did things and what you did. Also, an undervalued thing, I think, and just like having humorous documentation or fun documentation, having really great pull requests is a great way to make friends at your company. When you open up a pull request and it has screenshots, it's beautiful, and you walk someone through exactly how to test your code, people will really, really appreciate that. And they'll be like, wow, this person's amazing. What a great developer. So especially like if you go, sometimes you may have to open up a pull request for another team, like in somebody else's code. And so if you have something where it's like very clearly why you did the things and then how you can test the things, everyone, I don't know, if someone does that within ours, I'm instantly just want to be their friend. So things that can really make a pull request shine are screenshots, GIFs, videos, anything that makes things visually obvious, links to resources, and code that you had referred to. Also, self-reviewing your code. And I always try to do this when I open up pull requests. I go through and like read through my own code, and then I add comments on like why I did something here. And so you could add a comment in the code, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The comments in the code are very permanent, that you want to be there forever to explain your code. But sometimes if you want it slightly less permanent, but to give some context that it's like the very specific issue that you're dealing with, you may just add a comment into your own code to explain something. And then also having, if you open up a PR, it's really nice to have them small and narrowly scoped. And sometimes for issues, you may open up multiple PRs just to keep the amount of code small. And one way to lose friends or to make enemies is to open up a pull request that's huge and will require that someone reviewing it is going to have to spend like 2 hours, which is realistic, can happen, can spend hours and hours trying to review the code. So keeping them small and narrowly scoped is always really great. Here we have an example. And this is, the template that y'all are pretty used to right now. One thing I would say is this template will serve you very, very well going forward. And most times on teams, they don't, like, you'll find that these kinds of pull requests are a rarity. And if you were to go onto the team and just copy paste this template and fill it in, you will usually be pretty amazing right off the bat. Like, people will be like, wow, this is really, really great. We can see we have testing steps or QA criteria. We have things that are outlined in terms of what else needs to be done. Because sometimes you may open up a pull request and it's not fully ready, or I like to have to-dos if it's a draft pull request where it's like, hey, wait, I know that this is not fully there, and these are still the things that I need to do. And sometimes those also help you to organize your thoughts. And yeah, and so we can just a good example of a pull request, and I think I'll have some experience with these already. So self-documenting code. Have y'all ever heard this phrase? So self-documenting code is, I guess the name self-documenting code is self-documenting because it kind of explains what it is. It's code that documents itself, right? And so what we mean by that, usually when we're talking about self-documenting code, it's things like having a name that explains what the thing is, so that just reading the code, I don't need to go and like figure out what the heck this thing is, because maybe a variable name was already explains what it is. And there are some people who would say that you shouldn't ever need code comments, because if your code is self-documenting, i.e. you name things really, really well, then code comments are irrelevant. I think that there's some truth in that, but also there are totally times when you need code comments. So I think that you should try to have your code as self-documenting as possible, but it's not always realistic for it to explain everything about your code. So why we do it is to make the code readable. And we also can, if we have a particular style of self-documentation or particular naming conventions that we use, it helps to promote stylistic consistency. And I think later on we have they have some links to some naming conventions that I really, really love. Oh, there they are. So how do we self-document? Be using lots of variables. Oftentimes you can create variables not because you need a variable, but just because it helps to explain what something is. Not abbreviating. And there are a few exceptions, like ID. You can usually don't have to write out identification, but usually, like, don't make an assumption that someone would know what obj means, or just other little things. So try not to abbreviate when you can. There's a saying within computer science that there are really two difficult problems in computer science. One is cache invalidation, and the second is naming things. So naming things is a really, really difficult problem, and oftentimes it's useful to workshop things. So going and talking to your fellow engineers and being like, hey, what do you think this should be called? Because sometimes, like, once you name it, you're usually stuck with that and you'll refer to it a million times in the code base. So spending some time on and talking to people about a name. And then also sometimes because you name something 2 months ago, what it is may actually evolve. So not being afraid to update the names of things. And then adopting a style guide, I think, is really great. And a wonderful style guide to read for React and JavaScript is the Airbnb style guide. They have one for JavaScript, and they also have one for React. Different languages will oftentimes have different companies that are like the most accepted ones. This one is a generally well-used one. And I think an indication that you really love what you do is if you actually find yourself reading through the Airbnb style guide and enjoying it. This is one thing where I was really surprised when I read it and I was like, huh, okay, this is actually a good read. You know? And I really had a lot of fun reading it. Same thing, this naming cheat sheet is, I feel like, absolute genius. I forget what this. It's a relatively famous developer. I forget what products, but this is a really, really great naming convention that I think can work on specific projects, and also just trying out these kinds of names may help to just our general best practices, like avoiding contractions and abbreviating, like we were just talking about. Yeah, this is, I really, really like this naming cheat sheet. And then here's a great little guide on some tips to self-documenting code. So we'll send these around at the end here. Okay, so we said some people would say that if you self-document, you'll never need comments in code, but that's not always the case. Which I feel like I had an example of why it's not always the case. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Like sometimes you may have a variable name once you start writing it, you're like, make sure user appears new to subscription API. Great, that's self-documenting, but also a ridiculously long variable name, not very easy to read. And a code comment may just be a lot better way to go about it. So a lot of times I'll think like, hey, is this variable name getting tough? Okay, maybe I'm just going to shorten the variable name and add some code comments around it. So why do we use code comments? They give your team some context behind the code. Sometimes your code can't just explain itself. They answer questions of the code that answer questions that the code itself doesn't. And as I said, self-documenting code is just not always feasible or practical. So what do we write? It's like the code itself is the what. So it's not really super useful to say what it's doing all the time. And focusing on the why is always really great. Keeping things short when possible. And if you do have a really long block, you can format them. And so like there's \\. In JavaScript is usually like how you would do a normal code comment. And that is great for a one-liner. If you have multiple lines, usually backslash star star, and then go down to the next line, have each line start with a star, is great for multi-line comments. We have some examples here that you can check out later. Commit messages, right? So we've had a little bit of experience with commit messages. They're really tough to write. Oftentimes you're like, wait, and sometimes they're overlooked. And commit messages are the kind of thing where they're not important until they're super important. And if you may at some point in your career find yourself in some sort of a war room when there was an outage affecting all of the customers, and they're going and digging through and trying to figure out why certain things are added. And they may come to a commit message that's yours. And it's usually is not going to feel super great if your commit message was like updated code, and then like that's it, right? So a lot of times commit messages, they'll be used in extremely important situations, and it's really great to have nicely documented commit messages. So much like code comments and a lot of the other forms of communication we have, where we do it to give context to the changes. They're super helpful to future devs to explain why things are done. And like I said, oftentimes when they're trying to figure out the why, commit messages could be in really high pressure situations. They're also useful when debugging, and they can be used to automatically generate change logs if you're working in packages. So sometimes they can be super duper important. Focusing on the why rather than the what. And also it's sometimes really great to have a consistent team standard for commit messages. And so one of the standards that I used on a previous team was like the Angular standard, which is very specific and looks like this. So you put like the type of change, so it's a feature change, a fix, doc, styling, blah blah blah. Give the scope where it is more or less, subject. You can think of like an email, you have the subject line, and then body that explains it further, and then the footer has some specifics for it. This is just one standard. There are lots of different standards out there, and have some links to some of them here. And then finally, tests. Now, tests do have the purpose of protecting your code, like making sure that you're not breaking things, but they also are a really great source of documentation. And oftentimes when I'm going into a foreign code base that I don't know much about, one of the first places that I'll look are the tests, because they document like what is the expected behavior of the application. And so they are a great source of documentation. They explain the intended behavior of the application, and they also alert devs to changing app behavior. So like if you make a change and then it's out of the parameters of what the test expects and the test breaks, that is a great way of communicating, hey, the application is not supposed to do that. So how we do this, we want to focus on really clear descriptions in our tests. Try to make tests readable. And oftentimes when writing tests, I know when I first started doing a lot of testing, it's usually written in the language that you're playing with, and you can do really fancy abstract things like loop over things and have a test for inside of a loop, or all sorts of crazy things. And those can be really fun, but I think that it's usually best to try to avoid it, and try to avoid unnecessary abstraction in tests. It's cool to like repeat yourself and have a test that like it is not really dry code, because it may just be easier to read that individual test. Really great if you want to get into testing, and specifically JavaScript testing. There we go. Kent C. Dodds is kind of the guru of testing. He has a really great course, and then also just his blog is really, really wonderful, and gives like philosophically a lot of great ideas around testing. So reading those, this is super duper useful on testing and in code in general. He has a lot of good stuff. And then his testing library for Jest, and actually there are kind of, I guess it's a bunch of different frameworks or testing tools. There's like a testing library for it. Like there's React testing library, and then there's Cypress testing library, Playwright testing library, that are all kind of a similar idea, that are really, really great to play with. So how have your experiences so far been with things like documentation, code, PR descriptions, code comments, stuff like that? How's it been going?
I always have a question about code comments. I always feel like I either don't have enough information or I have too much information, and neither is helpful. Whoever's reading.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've heard, keep it short. Should you keep your commits so short that you can should it be one piece at a time, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the commits, I always have a tough time with commits, because sometimes it's usually not a great stopping spot when you're committing, right? Or it feels like that. And so it can be a little bit tough, and you can, like at my company, we do something called squashing commits, which is you create all of your commits get squashed into a single thing when you go and merge your PR. And that's the time when you can sometimes reflect and construct a really nice commit. But with the commits, I would say usually being too short and not explanatory is usually the problem. So going and explaining not what you did, but like why you did it, is really, really the valuable thing there. With the code comments, like sometimes it feels like overkill, and there can be total overkill. Like I'm the kind of person who, if I see a giant block of code, like a code comment, I'll usually gloss over it. So like I find it useful sometimes if it's like a really like a big block of code is like, that you can kind of walk through it and have each line be applied to something rather than explaining all of it in one place. You can also add code comments in places like where you would declare the props or in a React code, or oftentimes people use prop types. And those are great ways of explaining the interface that we would use in order to work with a piece of React code. But I agree with you, Cole, that it is it's difficult to write really good code comments. Totally. Yeah. Is that meandering thing help at all or no? How else have things been going with things like documentation, PR, description, stuff like that?
I think I'm with you, Mike, with documentation. Like I see something and I'm like, okay, this will not help me because I'm not gonna give it the energy. Like it won't be concise, or it will be like really messy, or it will be a class component and I'll be like, no, I can't read this. So I'm trying to get better at like slowing down, I guess, because of course there will be helpful ones that might not be beautiful, like the React router one, but yeah, it's impulsive. It's like, okay, what is gonna catch my eye? So I need to get better with reading documentation for sure.
Yeah. And you'll eventually get some experience writing it, which I really enjoy, and you'll find that like senior devs write a lot of documentation. And that once you start thinking about like, okay, I'm writing this code, and then now how am I documenting it? That's really a sign that you're a mature developer, and not just thinking about how it works, but thinking about the future for like, how is future me going to know how it works, and future members of the team. Cool. So I want to move along because we do have issues and we're getting towards the end. So what we covered were documentation, talked about pull requests, talked a bit about self-documenting code, and hopefully know kind of what we mean by that. Comments in code, commit messages, and one of my favorite things, tests. So yeah, that is it. I'll make this this available, probably a PDF that I'll put in the group chats. And thank you all for bearing with communication for devs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Should we jump into the issues for the upcoming week?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, let me just share my screen here. And just one thing about code comments that I would like to bring up is that maybe start incrementally. Can everybody see my little, maybe this first issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So what might be nice is if you can properly name your functions and your variables, then you'll find yourself needing fewer comments because things are explained in the code for these early projects. So if you start there and you find that you're naming things properly, then you'll look and you'll say, okay, this jogged my memory enough. I don't need a comment here. And then you can kind of build there and see what might be needed for someone else. And also just consider your audience as well. Because if it's just you, then you kind of know what you might need and what you don't. Let's see here. All right, so we've got our first issue here. As a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that my list isn't cluttered with items that I don't want to buy in the future. And let's see, let's take a look at this wireframe. Let's see, before, just something here in the acceptance criteria, the user is able to delete an item. Before deleting, the user receives a prompt if they really want to delete the item to prevent accidental deletions. And the deletion should cause the associated record from the database to be deleted. So you'll be kind of working full stack this week. Once again, so this wireframe, we've got use of a label, we've got our delete button, and then hopefully our pop-up dialogue. Does anybody have questions about this issue? Okay, going to move on to the second issue. Oh, wait a second here. As a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I am likely to need to buy each item again, so that it is clear what I need to buy soon. Okay, so they have some possible item states. So this is interesting because it's more of a suggestion than a rule. You have need to buy soon, need to buy kind of soon, need to buy not soon, and inactive. Let's see, so our acceptance criteria are items in the list are shown as visually distinct. Items should be sorted by the estimated number of days until the next purchase. Items with the same number of days should be sorted alphabetically, and items in different states should be described distinctly when read by a screen reader. So there's a little bit of accessibility at play here as well. Okay, so let's see, we've got some notes here. The criteria for an item being inactive has tripped up teams in the past. It's been reworded to be more clear. So before we hand these out, I want to make sure that we answer any questions about inactive items that you might have. Let's see. And I want to see if they have a wireframe. So we have this wireframe here with our, they have a color-coded checkbox here for this one. So that's how this, this is the decision they made. I know we spoke a little bit about how we would achieve this at this point. So at this point, they're suggesting or showing a color-coded checkbox. Does anyone have any questions about issue 11 or 12? All right.
I just have one comment where you know, we were saying that the calculated estimates was a bit like being an API developer, and at a certain point you're going to like come back together and see how it works. There's one small thing I think it'll be a super easy fix, but within the calculate estimates, where I think we may need to update so that right now I think we're going straight to the previous interval of calculate estimates. And I think that we may need to take the latest interval or whatever it was called and be updating that, and then have the previous interval become the last time's latest interval, right? So one small thing that we'll probably need to do in order to get this one to work. And I didn't catch that before and didn't see it till the demo. It's super small. So just heads up on that.
Okay, and they have another note about a tricky piece here, is that teams in the past have over-engineered a solution by breaking the list out into separate groups, but it should be achievable in a single list with visual treatment. So it looks like of the two, because this list has the largest number of kind of pitfalls that have been noted, I'm going to rank this as a more intricate ticket with maybe some more moving parts that need to be considered. And if you're going to have that pre-discussion before you meet, I would definitely review this again before you move forward on whatever plan that you have, because it looks like there's a lot of information here. So we have our pairs this week, 8th through the 14th, Hans and Jess, Steph and Cole. So Hans and Jess, do you have a opinion or interest in either of these tickets?
Jess, how do you feel?
I feel fine either way. I'm fine with the more intricate one since I've been on a couple simpler ones, but I'm also cool with doing something that's interactive with the database. So
I was thinking the intricate one, do we have to do colors or can we go wild? Can we like categorize them in other ways, or just be like, I would rather do it like this or that? Sorry, my dog yelled. Like if I was like, hey, you need this right now, and then have a list of the things that say like, you need this right now, or then be like, you never buy this, and have it at the end. I'm just trying to think of ways to be creative.
So you mean like subcategories within your list that are like almost like subheadings? Or I'm trying to kind of visualize what you're suggesting.
Yeah, it's like not even necessary. I was just trying to think of like like green is, I assume like you should buy this sooner, but instead of just having like a color, yeah, like you said, like a subheading that's like, you need this right now. Just like, I'm just thinking of cheeky things rather than, and just being like things that you only buy once, like every few months, we're like, maybe you don't like this very much. I don't know. I'm just trying to, this is a, we can do that one. Sorry.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, as long as it meets the acceptance criteria, which specifies visually distinct.
Okay.
Now, you can interpret, I guess, visually distinct as a subheading, but that might be tougher. Especially, I'm trying to think if you're visually impaired.
Yes. Yeah.
Easier to tell when you're using color in some way than just more blocks of text.
Absolutely. No, that's so right. That's yeah, cool. That's good to know. Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. So you two are thinking about 12. Is that what I'm this? Okay, perfect. I'll just assign you to this one. Oh.
You may learn a bit if you haven't played with it before, the dot sort method, which for me is another one that oftentimes makes my brain hurt. Could be a good one.
Let's see. So that means we've got cool stuff on 11. All right. Do we have anything else that we need to go over?
I just have one thing, which is that this next week I'm going to be at a company retreat, so I'll try to be available, but at certain times, just I may take a bit longer, and I'm currently a maybe for next weekend. So I'll update as things go, but I'll still have Slack and not completely incommunicado. So.
Okay. The only thing I'll say is that this week was fantastic in terms of communication and understanding where the team was in Slack. Please continue to do so. Just checking in with us after your meeting with where you stand. You're both doing a great job with moving forward as a team, and just keep that communication up.
Thank you. Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, thank you very much.
Happy Mother's Day.
Anything else before we close out? Are we set? Because I know that there was also an issue with the merge breaking the code in some way. So how do you plan to go forward before you start working? Because you'll need something that works in order to do your first checkout to build.
I am not sure. I think we'll probably all take a look at it and then communicate via Slack before we pair, right? I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. Well, then if that's everything else, we'll try to keep an eye on Slack, and have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.